Yeah.
In terms of those tax hikes, again, Rachel Reeves is going to say we're living in a changing world today, there are more challenges, almost beginning to tee us up for, the spending review in June, which of course is more of a nod to her backbenchers who have got real problems with the spending review potential. You know, if they're going to lose a lot of jobs for their constituents, perhaps I understand that. But also for the autumn statement as well. Is this the start of a 6-month process where she's teeing us up for more tax hikes?
Quite possibly, yes. I do think that the appetite for austerity within the Labour Party is quite low.
But it's not austerity, is it? I'll just come back to that, because the Conservatives are saying it's austerity but in another name. She talked about spending 70 billion last time around. That's hardly austerity.
Well, it's a split between investment and day-to-day spending. I think that's the issue. But I do think that the appetite for meaningful austerity is going to be quite low. And I think the markets are going to be a bit sceptical as to whether she can kind of have some vague, unhypothecated spending reductions, in place for a 6-month period without saying what they are. Because I do think that we're now starting to see yields rise in Europe and the UK now based upon domestic fiscal reasons rather than the move of the US Treasury market. Because what's interesting is Treasury yields have fallen, bunch yields and gilt yields have risen. So suggesting there's something happening in terms of the domestic fiscal backdrop which is having an impact, and she can't allow that to drag on for 3, 6, 9 months because she could lose control of the bond market. I don't think she will, but she could do.
That was my next question. Nobody wants to see a Liz Truss quasi-Kwarteng type moment again. Even I think on the Conservative benches, it wouldn't really suit their purposes as well. How much are we meaningfully going to have to start looking at the competence of the Chancellor and the government economically? Because there is a lot of polls doing the rounds at the moment where competence and economic management scores are incredibly low.
I think it's the data that will actually determine it. And I think one thing that probably is going to help the government is that the ONS, who have had various issues around statistics, not just the labour force survey, but also the seasonal adjustments, could easily report better first half growth. If you look at the last few years, what's happened is first half economic growth in the UK has been stronger, second half has been inexplicably weaker. So she may have a get out of jail card simply because the seasonal adjustments actually cosmetically push up first half growth, and that gives her a little bit more wiggle room. But no, there is an issue. I don't think it's an existential issue, but I do think that what could be a perfect storm for her, and I'm not expecting it, but could be, is that if the long end of the US market, Treasury market, begins to sell off.
Which is what I said to Andrew Bailey, and he's like, no, we're okay.
Well, no, because we had a 40 or 50 basis point decline in Treasury yields.
Yep.
We've had a 40 basis point increase in bunch yields. We've had a 30 basis point increase in gilt yields. Now, that's unheard of. You never get those moves, and that tells you about the changing world order. But the shoe to drop, or the penny to drop, could be the long end of the US curve, which, if Trump gets his spending plans through in terms of tax cuts, for example, as the extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and then further tax cuts down the line, that could easily see a long-term Congressional Budget Office forecast of around 140% debt to GDP.
Yeah, just a 9% deficit or something like that.
Which makes the 85% number we've got over here look quite modest. So there is an issue out there where fiscal dominance in the US could take over and become a problem for us. And that's the thing I'd worry more about as a UK bond investor rather than domestic fiscal policy.